Neck deep in thick, putrid water and hundreds of feet beneath the earth, Victor Ramos gasped desperately for air. His throat stung as toxic gases filled his lungs and the smell of rotting flesh overwhelmed his senses. Behind him, in total darkness, he could hear a chorus of men who had put their lives in his hands, desperately gasping for air as the walls around them appeared to close in. As he relentlessly led the men forward, showing no fear or hesitation, his mind raced and he fought off panic. "We're going to die down here," Ramos thought. "I brought these men into this tunnel and we're not going to make it out. It's going to collapse. The floodwaters will drown us." His mind jumped to his two young sons waiting for him at home. Ramos knew he had to complete his mission and get home safely for them. All footage, images, and interviews featured in this video are based on first-hand accounts from the actual individuals involved in the events depicted. These interviews were conducted over several hours in 2008 in Itogon, Philippines, by a trusted associate. This is the first time these perspectives and materials are being publicly shared. I've been fortunate to work with these accounts, visuals, and testimonies to help bring this story to life. Hi, I'm Ronnie Floyd. If you enjoyed this documentary, please like and subscribe. It really helps me keep making content like this. I love creating documentaries, and your support makes it possible. And feel free to leave a comment if there's a topic you'd like me to explore. Ramos, a lieutenant in the Philippine Navy and the commander of a Navy SEAL team, was not easily intimidated. He had run SEAL teams on anti-terrorist operations in the rest of southern Philippines and had led search and rescue operations on the open ocean during raging storms. But when he arrived on September 26, 2008, at the mouth of the Antamok gold mine in the northern Philippine town of Itogon, he knew he was facing a challenge unlike anything he had ever experienced. A powerful storm had flooded the dilapidated mine as it was being worked by small-scale gold miners. An estimated 16 miners were trapped deep beneath the earth. It was Ramos's job to get them out alive. Ramos consulted local officials and trained miners familiar with the treacherous, dilapidated shafts to serve as guides. Then, he and his team gathered to pray before entering the mine. Hundreds of media representatives and weeping family members had gathered at the entrance to the mine, and Ramos told his men the importance of their mission. "These people are expecting us to rescue their family members down there," he said quietly as he huddled with his men in the storm. "We can't let them down." Ramos knew that he had to lead his men by example. They would walk into any situation as long as he was leading them. He took 3 other Navy SEAL divers and led the first descent into the mine. Being guided by volunteer miners, the Navy divers, carrying 6 oxygen tanks, walked nearly 2 kilometers through increasingly deep water and a tightening tunnel. Shortly after they began their trek, they lost radio contact with the command center. They were on their own with no way to signal for help. The mine had been operated by a major gold mining company years ago, but when the yield declined, the corporation pulled out. The mine was still accessible, but the stairs and access ways were corroded, and safety features installed by the company were gone. Despite the risks, impoverished local miners had moved into the mine, pulling small amounts of gold out of the old veins. When the storm came in late September, 16 were trapped inside. At the end of the grueling 3-hour, 2-kilometer underground walk, Ramos and his team looked in horror at the route ahead. A rusted, narrow ladder descended for 60 meters at a 90-degree angle. To Ramos, this looked like a hole from which he would never return. Using a safety rope, Ramos descended slowly down the corroded ladder, grasping desperately as rungs broke out from under his feet. He struggled to grip the rope as thick, brown water flowed down the ladder from above. His mask was covered in grime, so he made the descent blind. After another kilometer of crawling through a tunnel even tighter than the first, with jagged rock tearing at their clothes, and another corroded ladder down, Ramos and his team reached the Bua vein, the area where the miners were believed to be trapped. Exhausted and disoriented after 3 hours of grueling climbing, they were now ready to begin the most difficult part of their search, into the deepest area of the mine. Once into the vein, the conditions worsened dramatically. The volunteer miner guides were fully submerged for the first time. Unable to manage the scuba gear, they could lead the SEALs no further. Ramos and his men moved forward alone, diving in absolute darkness, feeling their way along the jagged rock walls, inch by inch. It was during this harrowing dive that Ramos struggled with self-doubt and the thoughts of his children. Ramos and his men carefully laid 50 meters of safety rope to find their way out and to find their way back in later. Exhausted, out of air and rope, and losing hope, they finally stopped in dejected silence. Ramos wondered if he had risked the lives of his men for nothing, if he was fighting the toughest circumstances in his life, only to find dead bodies at the end of his carefully laid safety rope. How can anyone still be alive down here? He thought to himself. After nearly 7 hours in the mine, Ramos and his men emerged into the stormy evening with nothing to show the desperate family members waiting outside. No bodies were recovered and no live miners were rescued. To make matters worse, another strong storm moved into the area. It was the same kind of storm that had flooded the mine originally and trapped the miners. The next day, the Civil Defense Commander on the scene suspended rescue operations for 2 days. Family members became increasingly desperate, and Ramos and his men waited anxiously to launch their next assault on the mine. Meanwhile, deep in the mine, Antonio Pagulayan struggled to maintain his sanity. 7 days earlier, he and another miner had been working the vein when water began rushing into the area. They tried to escape, but fast-flowing water pushed them deeper and deeper into the mine. In minutes, the water was up to their necks. Clinging to his fellow miner, Jose Panio Jr., he found a small ledge in a high area. There they huddled together, gasping to breathe and pondering their fate. "I've never seen water rise that fast," Pagulayan told his friend. "If it stays at this level, we're going to die down here." Day after day, as they conserved the batteries in their flashlights and told stories of their families between prayers, the water remained high. After a few days, the first flashlight burned out. The water surrounding them was putrid, so they drank rainwater that flowed down the walls. Starved and on the brink of insanity, they watched in desperation as the dim yellow light on their last functioning flashlight flickered. "Once this burns out, we have no hope of survival," Pagulayan thought to himself as he and Panio prayed quietly. "Is anyone there?" a voice echoed in the tunnel. Pagulayan's heart leaped. After 7 days in the darkness, he couldn't believe what he was hearing. "Is anyone there?" A black-clad Philippine Navy diver emerged from a nearby chamber. Crouched in the darkness, inching along the safety rope, Ramos could hear screaming ahead of him in the tunnel. His 2 lead divers had found someone. He moved quickly forward to join them in the opening, where he saw 2 pale, emaciated men, Pagulayan and Panio, shouting from a ledge. Seeing the men assured Ramos that his team's heroic work in the tunnels had not been for nothing. "Don't panic," Ramos yelled to the miners on the ledge. "We're going to get you out of here." While Ramos and another diver prepared to rescue the men from the ledge, he told the 2 lead divers, "If these men could survive, that means the others might still be alive as well." "Are there more who are still alive?" Ramos asked Pagulayan and Panio. The 2 men described hearing muffled cries from deeper in the mine, but they couldn't be sure how long ago and if the other miners were still alive. Filled with renewed hope, Ramos and a small team continued to move deeper into the mine. After a grueling 70 meters of crawling through tight, jagged passageways, the Navy divers were nearly out of oxygen when they found 3 more miners standing chin-deep in water. There was no way to bring the miners out immediately. Ramos made the heart-wrenching decision to leave them. Don't worry," he assured the men. "We are coming back for you." Making his way back through the tunnel, Ramos was not sure if he had told the desperate miners the truth. The men were behind nearly 100 meters of fully submerged tunnels. Ramos could see no way of getting them out alive. Out of oxygen and out of ideas, he led his team back to the surface to consult with civilian officials about the problem. "This is hopeless," Ramos thought. "These survivors are weak. They don't know how to use scuba tanks, and this is more than 100 meters diving in very difficult conditions with no pockets of air. Even Navy SEALs, expert divers with experience in the most treacherous conditions, could barely hold up in these conditions. How would these starving miners who never put on a scuba mask in their lives survive such a dive?" Back on the surface, Ramos made a pledge to himself. "I'm not going to let these men die down there. There has to be a way to get them out." Sitting quietly at the command post, while his men rested after a grueling 12-hour dive, Ramos took pencil to paper and worked out every possible scenario. By the next morning, Ramos had a plan. He gathered his rested and rejuvenated team and put them through a day of training on a rescue technique that he had developed overnight. By evening, they had mastered the technique and were making their way back through the mine to the 3 miners who were desperately waiting. When Ramos and the other divers emerged in the chamber, the 3 miners were crying tears of joy to see them. The Navy divers explained to them the precarious situation in which they found themselves. They were deep in a fully submerged mine and untrained in the use of scuba tanks necessary to get out. To rescue them, the Navy SEALs would need to strap the miners to a stiff stretcher, called a spine board, and attach an oxygen tank and face mask. The Navy divers would carefully carry the men to safety, but the miners would be restrained on the board, moving in tight, claustrophobic tunnels in absolute darkness and underwater. The miners were clearly terrified, but Ramos assured them that he knew of no other way to get them out. If they tried to learn to scuba dive in these conditions, they would most certainly die and possibly take one of his men with them. "You have to trust us," he told the miners. "We're going to get you out of here alive." With the first miner strapped in, a lead diver inched forward through the narrow tunnel, feeling his way by hand. Divers on each side of the board twisted it to fit through the narrow passages and protected the miner from the jagged rocks. A Navy diver at the back provided the propulsion, pushing the stretcher forward. Without voice communication and near-zero visibility, the divers communicated by touching each other. One by one, the exhausted Navy divers brought out 5 more miners using the painstaking technique. One of the miners, who Ramos won't identify, panicked in the midst of the rescue. Ramos had instructed his men to firmly restrain the men being rescued. If they panicked and began struggling in the dangerous confined spaces, they could threaten the lives of the Navy divers. The panicked miner, whose hand broke free, panicked and ripped off his mask. The Navy diver nearest his head forced the oxygen mask back on the man's face and calmed him down. During the 10-day operation, from September 25th to October 4th, 2008, 10 out of 16 trapped miners were rescued alive. In December 2008, the bravery of Ramos and his team was recognized during an award ceremony by senior Philippine military officials. He received the Bronze Cross Medal, one of the Philippine Navy's highest awards, for leading the rescue operation. For Antonio Pagulayan, who waited 7 days in the dark for rescue, the medal was well deserved. "If the Navy divers hadn't come," he said, "I wouldn't be alive today."